To the Wareham Free Library. We're very excited to have Irene Burgess with us this afternoon. We moved the meeting out into this area because we were looking for something a little cozier, plus they're doing some work in the big room. But I can't tell you how wonderful it is to see you all here. I need to ask you if you can all hear me. Yeah. Do you hear that, Irene? They can hear me. She gets after me all the time at meetings that I don't speak loudly enough. So I just want to make sure you could hear me. I want to turn the microphone over to Susan Pizzolato now, who would like to introduce our guest today.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. This is such a wonderful event for the library, and we're delighted to be able to bring everybody together on a cold January afternoon for such a warm event. I'd like to thank Linda Ames Byrne, who was instrumental in making contact with Miss Burgess and getting all these arrangements made. She and her mom, Betty Ames, are the local library Wareham history experts, and without them, us from out of town would be in big trouble. So we want to thank Linda and Betty. I also like to thank Irene's House of Flowers that provided us with the beautiful flowers that Irene's wearing, the table arrangement that she's going to be taking home, and the balloon bouquets. There's not much I could say to adequately introduce Irene Burgess. I'm delighted to be here today to learn a lot of things from her myself. I haven't had the opportunity of knowing her as long as a lot of you have, and I hope you'll come up afterward and greet her, come up and tell her how wonderful she is and that we're delighted to have her with us.
Maybe I'm not.
Because I'm sure she'd like to see who's here, and that would be terrific. And then afterward, I hope you'll enjoy some of the nice refreshments back by the front desk. So without further ado, let's hear from Irene Burgess.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Yes, I think everybody's heard of Irene Burgess. She stuck her neck out and got into everybody's business in the town of Wareham. And really and truly, it's been a lot of fun. But right now, of course, after the terrible accident and so forth that I had to go through, I'm confined to my chariot and home. This is a pleasure to be here this afternoon, and I'm going to enjoy telling you a lot of instances relative to Wareham and before Wareham. I have brought with me, to verify every single statement I say, a picture, so it's true history. I have a little question about history. Everybody that writes history writes it the way they want it. You can be writing a story, another fellow can write a story of a happening probably 500, 600, 700 years ago. They weren't there. Everybody has an impression, so they write their impression. Way back, I graduated in 1925. Ray Ryder was also a historian in Wareham. The two of us would get together, we'd call each other. Time after time, we thrashed this thing out about history. This is why today I have only brought with me things that you will see pictures of and know they are true. So afterward, if you'd like to come up, I'm going to have Richard here go around with them so you can see them as I speak. Now get comfortable, because it's going to be a little bit. Squirm in those chairs until you want to, and then I'll start. All of you people right now are on the shores of France, sitting on the beach. You're watching 4 little boats bobbing around out into the salt water, people hustling into it, bringing wooden kegs and bringing water, food, everything that they could think of, tools and everything else, which they might need, not knowing that they would. The Nina, the Pinta, and Santa Maria, and the Mayflower were the 4 boats. So after they loaded, the people got on board, they hoisted their sails, and off they went to the west. They sailed out of sight, and the people on the shore, like you, said goodbye. They really meant goodbye. They didn't ever expect to see or hear from them again. Those poor little boats sailed and sailed west day after day after day. Yes, there was sickness, there were deaths, there were burials at sea. People began to lose courage. They didn't think they'd ever see land again when one morning they waked up. There was a huge, great big bird flying over the first boat. They knew if they saw a bird, there would be land somewhere ahead of them, beside them, or somewhere in the future. So courage, the people began to spruce up, and they felt as if they had accomplished something. So in another day or two, a whole flock of those birds flew over. Then they kept going west, when one of the men on a telescope said, "There's a black line bordering the water." That black line was in the distance. They didn't know what it was. It separated the water from the sky. Fine. They kept on coming. That was land. They were thrilled. Now, it was the tip of Cape Cod on the Race Point side, which is the right side that they came up. They did not stop there, although I'm going to say, I'm not positive. About a month ago in the newspaper, there was a story about how the Mayflower stopped in Provincetown. I don't remember of ever reading they did, because they kept seeing water ahead of them inland and they kept going. They stopped in Plymouth Harbor. Fine. When they looked on the telescope, they could see movement on the beach. Not knowing what it was, it didn't look like animals, it didn't look like human beings, but it was moving around fast. They saw feathers, they saw the fur, pelts, they saw legs, bronze-colored legs, but they didn't see 4, they only saw 2. If they saw 4, it would be an animal. They could not decipher what it was. Finally, 3 or 4 of the men went inshore. Now, this is in Plymouth Harbor. They went ashore, they walked onto the beach, they put their hands in the air to show they had no guns, nothing whatsoever. No movement coming out of the woods. They couldn't see anything, so they hollered. And of course, in their English language, nobody recognized what they were talking about, but they kept hollering. Finally, 3 or 4 Indians came down out of the woods where their arrows pointed toward the men. The men continued to talk, but language barrier, no way were they understood. Finally, one man, he untied a drinking cup from his hip, leaned down in the salt water, got a cup of water, tried to drink it, spit it out, and emptied the cup and walked toward the Indians with his cup. Finally, the Indians realized it was water they needed. They led that 3 or 4 men into the woods to a stream of good fresh water. From then on, they were accepted. The people came off the boat, they settled. Now for the next 5 years, 2 of the boats went back to France, reported what had happened, and the influx of people came in Massachusetts. Now, they had settled, they built their cabins, they planted their gardens, they grew up, they bought horses from the Indians, they were friendly with them, but at arm's length. Intermarriages started before long. And at the south of them. So a group of them decided they'd go down. They got the things ready, harnessed a couple of horses, and walked down. Now, when they came down, they hit Onset. Now, Onset was not named Onset. There was an Indian name on Iset. Onset. Can you people hear me? Am I holding this mic all right? Good. Because I can holler. Anyway, they in turn were down on the shoreline, and the Indians, the Wampanoag tribe, which I know there are still descendants here in Wareham, they in turn did not welcome them, so they went right straight back to Plymouth. And a few years later, they came back again, loaded down with the wild turkey feathers, with skins, and all kind of beads. Now, the women had found a patch of clay. They made beads. They rolled them up. They put them in front of their fireplaces to dry. They took this juice of their wild berries and dyed them. Those strings of beads, the furs, and things that were brought back, the Wampanoag tribe welcomed those people. But they didn't want to stay there. They wanted to spread out. So they walked. Now I'm going to try to explain the direction. If you're standing facing the water, they walked to the right as if they were going up to East Wareham. They got up as far as, I'm going to say, Dr. Stillman's Drive, where the cemetery is. Different ones stopped off, claimed a piece of property, said, okay, I'm going to stay here, I'll build, we'll send back and we'll get the family, so on, so on, so on. This happened all on Great Neck, all the way down. Now, I'm going to the Burgess Genealogy. It is a long, long history of Wareham. Yes, my people were some of those people that walked there. They were the last ones to claim any property. That property was, you look at over Jordan, you look at Little Harbor, and it's the property back further, back of the beautiful old farmhouse that belonged to my great-great-grandfather. Now, they built a small cabin in the woods. They planted, they did everything, and so they lived there. Others came, and they lived around them. Now, the end of Little Harbor was sold to the Beaton family. That is the part that you cannot go on, that goes out to the channel. And while we're talking about Little Harbor, I'm going to jump ahead a bit now. Little Harbor had no roads to go in there. How would you get there? You walked across the marsh, or you went with a horse and wagon. That beach area certainly didn't look like what it is today. Where your parking lot is, well, it was covered with boulders, great big stones, all kinds of seaweed, 2 feet high in some areas, fish bones, and all kind of crabs upside down, and everything else, old lumber, boats that had drifted in, everything that had come in, a mess. The beach where the sand was, seaweed. Fine. That area was one of the most interesting areas that the people on Great Neck that lived later enjoyed. I'll tell you why. My great-grandfather decided that he would see if there was an area where the stones could be separated. He filled it up with seaweed, he put lumber in there, and built a fire on a Friday night. He took and covered it with seaweed. He went up to the farmhouse, and a couple of women had got together. They cut up fish, wrapped it up in wax paper. They had all kind of vegetables, and they put it in a couple of big tin trays that he'd made. He took it down and put it on top of that fire, covered it over with a wet piece of canvas, seaweed on top, and let it go all Saturday night burning, cooking. The next day he invited everybody on the neck to come in and enjoy a Sunday dinner. That was the first clam bake area only they weren't clams, they were fish and so forth. It was wonderful. The people enjoyed it. It gave them something to look forward to. Because, remember, when they settled on Great Neck, there was no way the woman of the house could get out if the husband took the horse and went to work. The horse and wagon, dirt roads, everybody dumped their shells on the roads. I think some of you people might remember the shell roads, all broken up and white to keep the dust down. That's what our roads were in those days. Now, I'm going to leave that for a minute. I'm coming back to that area because there's a very important something which you will remember. I'm going over to Onset. Fine. You know where the ladies and gents room is, up on the bluff. You're looking toward Buzzards Bay. There's that big apartment house. I think it's an apartment house. That is the area where the Wampanoag Indians had all of their, well, ceremonial affairs, their dances, their every single thing was held on that spot. Why? Because they could look down Onset Bay beyond Codman's Point to see if enemy were coming in, and they'd look back at Muddy Cove in back of them to see if an enemy was coming there. There was always a lookout in that spot. The fear was there because the white men had come in. They, in turn, enjoyed every single bit of Onset. The fishing, of course, is what they lived on, and the animals. There were deer, and, of course, all kind of wild turkeys and rabbits, everything else. That's what they all lived on. Plenty of food. No one had to worry about it, because if you didn't get it on land, you got it in the water, in the sea. Now, I'm going to leave that, and I'm going to come in Onset a little bit later. The area around the Showa was, well, it was a place that people used to go and entertain and so on. The area that was so important was over on Wickett's Island, going out by the bay. That, I'll tell you all about that. Lydia's Island, let's look at Lydia's Island. If you stand on the dock down there, you look toward the land across the water, Lydia's Island. Over on the left side of that island, in back, there's a small cranberry bog and a sand pit. That sand pit is the only sand, Brenda, ladies and gentlemen, this is Brenda Bradley, who takes care of me, made sure I got here and everything, and she's going to take care of this. Will you take and show the picture of my grandfather and all of his men and his great big boats? That, my grandfather's in here, his children, his two great big boats. This is over in Onset, and which is Shell Point. This is over Jordan here. And if you note the horse on a track running back, they filled that little cart with sand, dumped it in the boats, and it kept going the time. That sand was the only sand on the eastern shoreline of the whole United States that could fire the bases of furnaces. So he used to deliver that to foundries from Florida to Canada in his two big sailboats that he had. Of course, as I say, the Burgess family had everything. They had it. Yours truly, forget it. I've asked Richard, this is Richard Bradley, if he'd like to take these pictures around for you to see closer. And if it's going to bother, we'll just have them here for you to see and they're coming back. Now, on one of the trips out with his big boat, the great-grandfather, it damaged the hull of the boat. Why? He couldn't understand. So he got an underwater engineer to go down under the water between Wickett's Island and the mainland, the Codman's Point. They found a rock ledge under there, like a huge, great big stone wall. So they blasted it, got rid of it, made that passageway for big boats safe. And he also put up buoys in the bay, bringing in his boats. He had 2 huge, great big passenger boats that came in there. They had room for 200 people on each boat. They came in, brought passengers from Connecticut, Rhode Island, all of the southern coast of Massachusetts, and along the islands and Cape Cod and so forth. That is how Onset became so popular. People came for weeks and stayed either a daytime or a week or a month. This is how Onset was developed. Seeing the property, many people bought and stayed, but those boats, let me tell you, they were named Genevieve I and Genevieve II. If you had looked in the Standard Times, I will say maybe 3 months ago, a little longer, you would see on the docks in Fall River, New Bedford, a wreck of a boat laying against the dock, says Genevieve II. The caption said under it, "I wonder who this wreck belongs to." I wanted so to call him up, but I didn't dare, because I didn't know who had bought it from the family. The other boat, as the last I heard, was taking passengers, sightseers, up the Hudson River in New York. Still sailing. Must have been a pretty good boat, I'll say, to last all these years. But that part was a part that brought people into Onset, which developed Onset to what it is today. Remember, we have in Onset a lot of points of interest. You have an area which I feel very bad about, is where that big parking lot is that we used to have the Temple Theater. That Temple Theater was absolutely beautiful. It was built and used. I can remember, I worked for Ben Waters. After I graduated, he owned the Electric now, the electric light company. He lived in Marion. He was the one that built the lighthouses in front of the police station. And so he, in turn, decided that he'd take, when they had the temple open for a big time in the fall, one of the areas for exhibit. So I manned that area. He had a store on Main Street. Maybe you'll remember these names. It was a small store. Half of it, Harry Joy and I was in. The other half was Lil Kelly and, the name I've lost it. It'll be with me in a minute. Does that ever happen to you? Do you ever think of anything and all of a sudden it's gone? Well, anyway, she had a gift shop there. And so they, in turn, enjoyed so much the entertaining. Harry Joy, the one that ran the one I was in, I didn't like him. I had an awful time with him. But we went to the temple anyway. The Wampanoag Indians asked if they could decorate the stage. Well, folks, I'm going to tell you it was beautiful. They had a wigwam. They had furs on it. They had a little fire going with a pronged sticks on each side, and across it a stick, something on it. I don't know what it was. Sure didn't look like anything to me. But anyhow, they had a beach area pine trees and other kind of trees. And the most important thing was a white birch bark canoe. Absolutely gorgeous. Cornstalk were there, pumpkins all over the place. A beautiful sight. I wish to goodness pictures had been taken of. Maybe they have, I don't know. I've not run into it anyway. But it was lovely. That was when the festival was first started down in that area. Now, I have a picture of Onset. I think it's that one right there. Yeah, that's it. Folks, I might as well tell you, I'm losing my eyesight. I'm losing my hearing from the accident. So please, if I make a mistake on this, I think you'll straighten me out, won't you? Huh? This is a picture of Onset, the layout from the air. Would you believe Onset looked like that? Onset is a beautiful, beautiful place. It's a nice place to live in. There's everything there, and I'll tell you more about what was there. We have got several other pictures here of the area down in Onset. What have you got there, Brenda?
The first one is where the pier.
Oh, yes. That's the parking area. The parking lot on the wharf. Now, when my great-grandfather's boats came in, that wharf wasn't there. He had to build a 36-inch walk across the front of the water, down on the side by Kenny's saltwater taffy building, and across the front where it's near the land until it got to the high land where the bluff goes up. That's where the people had to walk to get off of the boats when they had deep sea boats coming in there. This is a picture of Onset Harbor and the walk, the wharf. What do we got? Is that the Ernestina? No. Oh. Let's go down. Do you remember 1914? Yeah, 1914. They started building the canal. My uncle was a truant officer, and believe me, you wanted to be in school with that guy around. He and Henry Burgess, his name was. He had a Rio bus, drove a school bus. He used to load us up at night and take us down to see what was going on at the canal. Well, we used to go down, we stop on the edge. The men was digging, they were digging by hand, not from the middle where that stream went. They were digging from the shoreline out in order to widen, get the width for that canal. You know, it wasn't too long before both sides, and they met where the water was, and then they put the dredges in and began to dig it. Then, of course, how are you going to get across? How? They built that railroad bridge. You've got the railroad bridge, the old picture of the railroad bridge. You remember, had a great big hump on it, and then a straight part that went out. That was the railroad bridge in Buzzards Bay to get the trains across. They never came across before, so they met in Buzzards Bay after that. Then the other bridges, you got the picture of the wooden bridge, of the bridge where the cars went. You know, you might remember it. Remember the road separating, going up in the air? All right, if you were traveling to the Cape, those gates came down with the lights flashing and the bells ringing. You stopped your car, you sat there, you waited. All of a sudden, up comes the road, right straight up in the air, on both sides. Scares you to death because you don't know whether it's going to go back and be connected or not. Boats went through, they dropped that road again. I will never forget once, I was the first car. I was petrified. I was so afraid it hadn't connected in the middle properly. It had. Now that's how they went across the canal. Today, what would it be with Cape Cod built up the way it is today? You can't even get across the two bridges decently now. So in late 20s and the 30s, they decided to build. They built the bridges in Buzzards Bay and Sagamore. They were ready to be opened up, 1934. I will never, never forget it. Judge Stearns, a big judge in Boston, owned a place next to where I stayed in the summer in Onset. He asked me if I would like to go down to see the new bridges. I said I'd love it. So we went to Sagamore. He said, come on, I know the man that's here. See if we can walk across it. I said, oh, no. Well, I did. Now, they were cleaning it up, getting all the debris off of it to open. All kind of their tools, horses, I mean the wooden horses, everything that could be on there that they used were there. We had to go around it, step over it, and so on. By the time I got on the Sagamore side, I didn't care if I ever came back. It was terrible. I got back to the car and I said, no way can I drive. Look at the size of my feet. So he drove and we came home. No more. That is the longest bridge I ever walked on. It was a lot of fun to see all that was done in the time from that until morning when passengers could go across, people could go across. Thank God for those two bridges. They need another one. The traffic down on Route 3 is wicked today. If you listen to the 5 o'clock news in the morning, you'll hear it, how they crowded up there on holiday weekends. Let's get back to Onset a little bit. Onset Avenue. The trolley track from New Bedford came down, went through the main street of Wareham, right through the middle of it, kept on going, and it went through the woods, which is now Minot Avenue, came down and was on the right-hand side of the Onset Avenue going into Onset. But there was absolutely no way that that bridge, that trolley could get across to Point Independence. So it had to go around. They did build a bridge that's dummy bridge for the trolley to get across. There's a picture here of dummy bridge showing the trolley going across. Now that bridge was very low. The fishermen, believe me, did they raise Cain. The men, like they do at town meeting today, they in turn finally got that bridge so that it was opened up and a road and everything. The whole thing was changed from the picture. You got it?
There's a little picture here with the trolley on it.
No, that is down in Buzzards Bay. It's, you got the Onset group.
Yep,
It
this is
shows,
the Onset.
it shows the tracks.
The track.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The
Is that the one that, can you see the trolley going across the dummy bridge?
It has the dummy train.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah. And that in turn, bridge had to be changed because of the fishermen. They couldn't get their boats up in there. Now, let's go to the end of Onset Avenue to get to Point Independence. There was absolutely no way whatsoever that you could get over to the point. So a few people said, let's build a raft. So they built a raft, and it was just big enough for a horse and team. A small little shed on it, and that shed took care of the caretaker on that barge. So you would drive up on the ramp, put your horse and wagon on it, get out of the wagon. You know, then you had to help the man on there to get that barge across to the point. How? They had a rope from each shore, connected each shore, and they pulled over their hand this way to get that barge across. Otherwise, you would have to go all the way to East Wareham and come down what we call Cranberry Highway now to get in there on Cahoon Street and get into the point. But this was a much more simple way, but it only took one horse and a wagon. And so they used that for years until back in the 80s, the men decided we got to do something about it. It's getting too busy. The tie-up on each side was too much. So they in turn got together, talked about it. A man there from Wareham, England, spoke up and said, why don't you build a bridge that will go across there? And they said, we don't have the money. The town didn't have it, and so on. He said, I know of a bridge in Wareham, England, that wasn't that expensive. It could be built, and it could be paid for any way that you want. So, believe it or not, they finally won out, got the bridge. Now, let me tell you something. An artist in England painted the English bridge, a picture of it, and sent it to me. Brenda, you got? Okay. This is, I pride, this picture. That's a picture of the bridge in England. That's coming up here to the library when so along with all these books, I've got, like that book right there, I've got 25 scrapbooks full. Since 1925, I have been doing it. It's got everything all about Wareham. Maybe some of you people are pictured in it. If you've done anything in Wareham on any committee or anything, you're in them. One of the books. The write-ups about everything. Matter of fact, let me tell you something. Here this last year, a couple of people came to my place. They couldn't find what they wanted. I think they'd been to the library, they'd been everywhere asking. So they said, I hear you've got some books. I said, yeah. So they sat on the floor in my house. They went through the books, they found what they wanted. I had saved it, just a little article, just something, but it's in the books. Figure 24, with 200 pages in every one of them. What must be? That one. Oh, that's President Bush and Barbara and so on. I was with them one day in Boston and spent the day with them. They, the pictures all through there. There's loads of others in that. All of those books are coming up here to the library. I don't know what they're going to do with them, but they'll be interesting. Now, let's go down again to Onset, and let's take a look at the area where the boats were coming in and going out. As I said, my grandfather had the buoys, but they had to go around Codman's Point. Now, Codman Point, Burgess Point, Little Neck, the harbor, and everything, all was 246 acres my family had. We owned Little Harbor. That was ours. Until 1938 hurricane came. I said to my father, I think we better go down to see how your father is. He's 96 years old. He's got animals, and they have to be taken care of, and we want to see if the farmhouse is taken care of. So we went down. I had just bought a Chevrolet coupe. Probably was a month and a half old. So we decided to go down in that. Parked it in the driveway. I went in. My father went in. My grandfather was 96 years old. They were sitting in the sitting room. I was out on the porch. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I saw this with my own eyes. I was looking toward Little Harbor when it looked as if the whole ocean came up over the beach. I screamed. My father came running out. My grandfather did, but he fell. 2 weeks later, we buried him. It was too bad. Couldn't get a doctor or anything, of course. He got the animals out and got them up behind the house. That water came over the marsh. It came up across the road. It went over Jordan and connected with the water in Onset. The first time I have ever heard, and I haven't since, that Great Neck was an island. And it took about an hour to 2 hours for that water to recede and go back again. My car set in water up to the running boards. I was hoping, and praying to God, I was hoping that it would stop so I could get home. I asked my father to get a doctor. The telephone wires were gone. It was a terrible storm, a terrible storm. And sure enough, he finally got the doctor, but not until the next day, too late. We lost our grandfather, I did, in 2 weeks' time. But after that, the family sold Little Harbor. They sold it to Jacoby. And Jacoby sold it to the town of Wareham in 1946. So that the town then took it over. That's when roads went down through Red Farm and went out there so people could get to it. It was cleaned up. Now all those big rocks and boulders that were on the parking lot are now in a sand pit in back of the East Wareham, what was post office. I see something? Okay. Those stones are all in that to fill that sand pit. So when we sunk a capsule in Bessie Park, Tony Fernandez and I went up to that sand pit. We picked out a stone. He had the men bring it down. That stone is in Bessie Park on top of the capsule that will be opened 100 years from 1976. It'll be 276 when it's opened. There's 4 posts around it with a chain. You might see it as you go in. That is holding the capsule down underground. I placed the capsule in the ground. All the businesses gave us different things to put in it. There was money in it, coins, all kind of church calendars, all kind of programs, everything town. There was a town report. Everything is in that capsule. But I must tell you, we had to find something to call it a capsule. You know, I went to Cornwall. He had the darlingest little display casket you ever saw. I asked him for it. He gave it to me. That is what is underground. And it's tied up with a big red, white, and blue ribbon right on the top. We have pictures of all of that being taken. I hope some of you people are around to see that opened, because it will be interesting to compare today with that time in the future. There are so many things relative to Wareham. If you happen to be in the Congregational Church on December 10th, I think it was, or 11th, in 1906, you would hear the pastor say to the congregation, "The town of Wareham is on fire. The whole main street is burning up." The people rose like one person and went immediately. Wareham had no fire department. They had nothing to fight fires at that time. So the people went down with buckets, pails, anything they could get, and did what they could do, but they lost every store on Main Street. Burnt up, 1906. I have the whole story of it. It's all written up, 5 or 6 big long pages. Very, very interesting. You know, folks, there's so much interesting. I'm losing some of the very important parts, I know. Onset was a religious area. The RLDS campground is just before you get into Onset. They have meetings where people come from all over the United States to those meetings. I'm going to tell you a cute little incident. My mother belonged to that church. She was born in Dennisport, a school teacher in Wareham. We were down at Dennisport. My sister and I were with her. I might have been, 10, 11 years old. I'm not sure. And they decided they were coming up to the ceremonies. They hitched up the wagon, rolled us up in straw back, a couple of other women. At 3 o'clock in the morning, we came to Onset. Fine. They were having a baptismal underwater. I was baptized in that river underwater. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to say, when I went underwater with my mouth open and I came out spitting water, and I was only a little kid, I was so mad, I couldn't understand it. But that was religion. We had the wigwam, and then we had the spiritualists in there. We had 2 or 3 other denominations, the Methodist Church, and Onset was really religious. The Onset Bay Grove Association really ran Onset. They might have listened to Sweatman, I don't know. I'm not positive, because back in the Revolutionary War days, the men from Onset walked to the Providence area, and they in turn were at war there. About a year ago, in the paper, reading in the paper in Connecticut, this family bought a piece of property. On that property, when they walked it, they found a little cemetery, and it was with one grave, one person. That one person was from Onset. That one person happened to be a member of the Burgess family. I'm the last Burgess. When I go, the Burgess family is all done in Wareham. So just say good riddance. I also enjoyed very much the schooling that we had. I lived in New York. We lived about 42 miles north of New York City. And incidentally, ladies and gentlemen, when this girl came to work for me, she told me she lived in Mount Kisco, 2 miles from where I lived in Bedford Hills, New York. Unbelievable. So we had a lot in common. And it's been interesting listening. They've been hearing, she's been hearing the things after her family. She's got family there, telling me about how things have changed. I'd love to go back, because now it's just a part of New York City. Valhalla, and Pleasantville, and all of those places have really joined hands and is part of the city now, where it spread so. But then, of course, there are so many other things I just love to tell you about. I am not sure I lose some of it. This thing up here works when I wind it up. It's getting run down right now. But let me say one thing. On Park Street, the end of Park Street is a street back of Onset Avenue, a couple of streets. I lived in the summer there. Across the street were little cottages, 2 rooms. The people rented them to go to the church, Latter-day Saint Church, and to any one of the churches. There would be one room with a bed, a little small table, and a couple of chairs, some nails in the wall to hang your clothes. The other one had a place where it had a sink and you could cook in there. They used to rent those poor little things and stay weekends. It was all right as long as the weather was good, but they were only boards that abutted each other. They weren't tongue and groove or anything. The rain came right through in many, and it was cold. I know because Mrs. Schooler, that owned a big place on Park Street, bought two of them, put two together. And I used to go down there. I put Scotch tape over the seams. We did everything to close out the dampness and everything. Then took bedspreads and hung them up. Did everything. Finally I said, we're going to have some heat in here. So I bought some brick. Now believe this or not, you can go see it, it's there today. I built an outside fireplace against the building. Had a man come and finish it off, connected to the building. That's the only heat that they had in that little place. I'm telling you, I didn't know how to build a fireplace, but I said I'm going to build something to have some heat. But that was what people came down to live in the early days. The Temple Theater, as I say, was at the end. Why that ever was sold, I don't know. I'd like to know where it is today. It was absolutely beautiful. The outside was as pretty as the rest of it. Let me say one thing. Not too long ago, there was an upheaval in Onset on Union Avenue, removing the island and so forth. I got a little uptight about that. I went to the hairdressers at Winners. After the accident, and as hard work walking, I parked my car on the other side of the road because to turn around and get back into the traffic to get up Onset Avenue, I didn't want to. I could go right straight out over the dummy bridge and get out. So I had to walk. I walked down to the restaurant. All I had to look is to the left to see traffic coming. I didn't have to look three ways, which would be coming in Onset Avenue onto that road, coming from both directions. I got across beautiful. That island was an island of safety for me. I rested. You walk with a cane, folks. You walk with a leg that's connected to your body with steel rods and screws and everything else. I'm all full of metal. I went through a lie detector and it went click, 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 click. So this is one of the things that bothered me. I got on the island, I rested, I went across to the other side, waited, only had to look in one direction to see the traffic. Got across beautifully, one car slowed down. Now, if they remove that island, what all the rest of the handicapped people in Onset going to do? I'm not the only person that has to use a cane or one of these chariots. You, in turn, will see them. They're coming out more and more because state law requires they have ramps. I feel so sorry for anyone that has to be in the same condition and position that I'm in. I long to do things. But at 92, what do? You do the best you can do. But I have enjoyed history. I enjoyed all the years that I have been able to read. Now I use one of these magnifying glasses. I can see some, but print is rough to read. There's so much, folks. I wish you could read more about Onset. I wish you could read more about Wareham. Wareham was built, of course, along the river, the Wareham River coming in, because, let's go back to the Revolutionary War, when the British soldiers came up that river, the people of Wareham had organized. The women were standing right to shoulder with the men, loading their guns, and keeping the men so they could keep firing. Finally, the British left. They got in their boats, they took their wounded, and they got out of Wareham Harbor as fast as they could go. Now, when Mother put me on the boat in New York, I was probably only 9, 10 years old. We went down by the train. We got on the Fall River boat. She left me in the hands of the stewardess. I went into the cabin. I never took my clothes off. I never went to bed. I just sat there scared to death. Every time that boat went by, when that clang, clang of that awful whistle, oh, it was awful. When we got to Fall River, the stewardess took me off the boat, put me on the train, and that train went to Middleborough, where my grandfather was waiting for me, and I went down. Now, that boat ride was wonderful. Today, it's gone. It no longer exists, but the train tracks are there. When we came into Wareham, we came down Main Street. I always looked for the castle on the hill. That's Toby Homestead. That was my castle. The King and Queen lived in that castle and ran Wareham. That was my way of thinking about Wareham. They have the best view of the whole town. They look right straight across the water where the railroad tracks are, Narrows Bridge. They could look down by Wars where the water, where all the boats are. They can follow it down Onset Avenue. It's a beautiful, beautiful location. I worked for Franconia Coal Company in the theater building, War Theater on Main Street. A bad storm was coming. The police went through town, told everybody they better get out. So I left, got in the car, got down as far as the Narrows Bridge. That's as far as I got. I looked and the water was coming. Way up, I saw a boat riding that water. Bill Ross rode his boat over the bridges, both the railroad bridge and the street bridge, and landed up on the further side. I parked my car in front of Toby Homestead. I got out so fast and went up that hill. I squatted down in front of the homestead. The wind was terrible. I looked, my car disappeared underwater. I went up, walked up to High Street. I don't know how I got home. To this day, I don't remember. I think I was just knocked silly because I lost my car. Anyway, that was another one of the times when the ocean took over. You do not control water, ladies and gentlemen. When the sea decides to do something, it's going to do it. Get out of the way. That's all I can say. I've been involved with it too many times. The area of where, I'll say Parkwood Beach, there's a ledge that goes out from Parkwood Beach that's underwater there, and that ledge is considered to be part of Marion. Now, I cannot verify that. I have read that. I'm not certain whether you have heard it or not, but underwater, beyond Parkwood Beach, is supposed to be Marion Line. I'm still trying to find out. I probably shouldn't have said anything about it, but I couldn't help it because I lived in Parkwood Beach for many years. Are you tired?
Keep going. You're doing all right. You're doing fine.
I think it might be interesting if you people would like to come up and see some of these things. Ask questions. I have forgotten a lot that probably, let me show you. There's the list. There's the list. And believe me, you'd be here all night. Thank you, ladies, for having me. I have enjoyed it. God bless you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have some refreshments in the back if you'd like to come up, however, and speak to Irene for a few minutes and look at some of the things she brought with her. I don't think she'd mind. You could ask some of the individual questions that you have. We're certainly happy that you came today. Irene mentioned that she's not sure what we would do with all of the things that she has, but trust me, Irene, we would treasure them. Thank you all very much for coming.
I think that was one of the finest things in all the years I've been.